Welcome to Mr. Hutchings History, where the past comes alive. Let's dive into today's story.
All right, so buckle up because today we're taking a deep dive into the freedom rides of 1961.
Definitely a story that goes way beyond the textbook version.
Exactly. We're going to uncover the strategy behind it all, the incredible bravery of those involved.
And the media's, well, let's just say, interesting role in how America saw it all play out.
It's 1961, right? Segregation is the law in many parts of the South, and you've got the Supreme Court saying, nope, segregated bus terminals are unconstitutional. But still, nothing changes.
It was a blatant disregard for the law.
A total slap in the face to justice, and I think that's where Corey, the Congress of Racial Equality, said, enough is enough.
They knew they couldn't just sit around and wait for things to magically get better. They had to take action and force the issue out into the open.
They weren't just like hopping on buses for a road trip. This was a planned statement.
Absolutely. Every single detail, the route, even down to when they would depart, all strategically chosen. Like they decided on May 4th as their starting point, aiming to reach New Orleans on a very particular date, May 17th.
Okay, so why that date? That can't be random.
You're right, it wasn't. May 17th just happened to be the anniversary of the Brown v. Board of Education ruling.
The one that declared segregation in public schools unconstitutional?
Exactly. By landing in New Orleans on that date, CORE was making a direct connection to Brown v. Board. They were saying, you were told to desegregate, and we're here to make sure it happens.
It's like they were calling them out. But we both know this doesn't have a picture-perfect ending, does it?
No, it doesn't. That journey, intended to be a peaceful push for justice, was met with unbelievable, and I mean truly horrifying violence.
So nowhere was this more evident than in Anniston, Alabama.
Right, so picture this. May 14th, a bus carrying the Freedom Riders, black and white folks, pulls into Anniston, and instead of a warm welcome, they find
a mob.
Over 200 people, many of them Ku Klux Klan members, fueled by hate and dead set on preserving segregation. And get this, the police, the ones meant to protect everyone, were in on it.
Wait, seriously, they were in cahoots with the mob?
It's true. Bull Connor, who was Birmingham's Commissioner of Public Safety at the time, he'd struck a deal with the Klan.
A deal?
Yeah, terrifying one, where he ordered the police to stand down for 15 minutes, giving those people free rein to terrorize the riders.
15 minutes? That's not just standing down. It's basically an open invitation to violence.
You're telling me. Yeah. And those 15 minutes, they had devastating consequences. The mob set the bus on fire, forcing those terrified riders to flee for their lives as they were being brutally attacked.
I can't even begin to imagine the fear, the chaos, the sheer panic in those moments.
And you know what makes it so much worse? This wasn't just a local failure. This is a colossal failure of the federal government to protect its own citizens. Think about it, the FBI. They knew about the planned attack beforehand.
What? Are you serious?
They'd gotten solid information about the Klan's plan, but did absolutely nothing to stop it.
It's sickening. It wasn't just a lack of action, it was a conscious choice to let it happen. But thankfully, this horrific display of hate didn't happen in a vacuum. There were witnesses, and crucially, there were cameras.
And let's be clear, these weren't your discreet smartphone cameras of today. We're talking big, bulky equipment, impossible to miss.
So those pictures, those searing, gut-wrenching images of the burning bus, the battered faces of those brave riders, they weren't just tucked away.
No, they weren't. They were broadcasted right into living rooms all across America. Yeah. The sheer brutality of it all. It was unavoidable because it was right there on their TV screens for everyone to see.
That must have been a game changer.
Oh, it absolutely was. This could have easily been swept under the rug. But those images, those raw, unfiltered images, they changed the entire narrative. Makes you think, doesn't it? I mean, the power of those images back then, this was 1961, no internet, no way to instantly share something with the world.
Right, like, forget going viral, this was pre-viral, everything.
Exactly. Television. That was the biggest, most immediate way to reach a massive audience. Everyone saw those images, felt the impact of them.
It does make you wonder, though, right? Like, what if social media did exist back then? Would those images, spreading like wildfire online, have actually made change happen faster? Or would it have just, amplified the division we already see so much of today?
That's the million-dollar question, isn't it? Would it have been a catalyst for good or just thrown more fuel on the fire? It's Hard to say for sure.
It really is. But we do know that even back then, media coverage, however flawed it might have been, it played a crucial role in shifting public opinion. People couldn't just turn away. It forced them to confront the reality of segregation.
They couldn't pretend they didn't see it.
Exactly. So here you have this national outcry, people witnessing this awful brutality firsthand, or at least on their TV screens. Where was the federal government in all of this? They couldn't just sit back and watch this unfold, could they?
Well, this is where it gets even more interesting, particularly when you bring Robert Kennedy into the mix. He was Attorney General at the time. Put yourself in his shoes for a moment.
Okay, let me see. On the one hand, you have the highest law of the land, the Constitution.
Which he swore an oath to uphold.
Right, so he has to act, but at the same time, you've got this massive tension between state and federal power going on.
States' rights were a huge deal back then, especially in the South, and Kennedy needed their support.
Talk about being stuck between a rock and a hard place, upholding the Constitution, but also trying to keep the country from completely falling apart.
It was a tightrope walk, for sure. And then, to make matters even more complicated, you have Governor John Patterson of Alabama. He basically throws gasoline on the fire by refusing to protect the Freedom Riders.
He just flat out refused.
He did. Claimed it was a state matter, and the federal government had no business sticking its nose in.
Talk about a slap in the face to Kennedy.
Absolutely. And it put Kennedy in a really tough spot. He was getting pressure from everywhere. The governor of Alabama practically daring him to intervene. And at the same time, you had civil rights leaders demanding he steps in to protect these riders.
So what finally pushed him to act? Was it simply about enforcing the law, or were there, political considerations mixed in there too?
I'd say it was a perfect storm of factors, honestly. I mean, the violence was impossible to ignore, and the media kept the pressure on relentlessly. But Kennedy was also a savvy politician. He knew the civil rights movement was gaining momentum and aligning himself with their cause. That was a smart political move.
So he finally steps in, sends in federal marshals to protect the Freedom Riders, right? Case closed.
It wasn't quite as straightforward as that. This is where it gets kind of wild. When the bus drivers in Birmingham refused to go any further, fearing for their lives, Kennedy had to personally step in and find a way to get those riders to Montgomery.
Wait, really? He got directly involved in finding a bus driver?
He did. Can you imagine that?
That's incredible. I mean, this is the Attorney General we're talking about, picking up the phone, calling a bus company.
And vouching for the safety of the driver. But that's how high the stakes were. Kennedy knew the world was watching. The whole nation was holding its breath. He had to do something.
It's just mind-blowing when you think about how much resistance these activists faced at every turn just for wanting the basic right to travel with dignity. Really shows you how deeply ingrained segregation was in the fabric of society back then.
It does, but it also speaks volumes about the unwavering spirit of those who fought for equality.
Absolutely. So with all this pushback, all these obstacles, how did the Freedom Rides ultimately succeed? What made them this turning point and not just, a tragic footnote in history?
I think a lot of it comes down to the sheer guts and determination of the Freedom Riders themselves. Just imagine getting on that bus, knowing you could be attacked, firebombed, even killed, all for wanting to sit in a seat on a bus.
It seems unimaginable today, doesn't it? Like something you'd read in a dystopian novel, not something that actually happened in America.
I know, it's hard to wrap your head around. And remember, these weren't soldiers or politicians or famous figures. They were everyday people, students, teachers, ministers, even a farmer. But they all shared this unshakable belief in justice.
And that's what resonated with so many people, right? It wasn't about power or fame for them. It was about something much, much bigger.
You hit the nail on the head. And of course, we can't forget the impact of the media. We talked about the power of those images, but their coverage went beyond just showing the violence. They brought the stories of these Freedom Riders to life, put a human face on the struggle, made it real for people who might not have understood what was at stake.
So it was like this perfect storm of factors, right? The riders' incredible courage, the unwavering media spotlight, and the pressure it put on the federal government. It all combined to force change.
It did. But even with Kennedy's intervention, it's not like the violence just magically disappeared overnight. There were still countless acts of resistance, and the fight for equality was far from over.
You're right, it wasn't a clean victory, but it did pave the way for future progress, didn't it? They shined a light on the issue that couldn't be ignored.
Absolutely. The Freedom Rides were a catalyst, a spark that ignited a movement. They forced the issue of segregation onto the national stage and showed the world that the fight for civil rights in America was far from over.
Yeah, it really puts things in perspective, Like, we have so much power at our fingertips today with social media and everything, but are we really using it to make a difference?
It's a question worth asking, right? What are we choosing to amplify? Whose stories are we telling? Are we shedding light on injustice or just adding to the noise?
It's a lot to think about. So, as we kind of wrap up this deep dive into the freedom rides, what's the biggest takeaway you hope our listeners are left with?
Hmm. You know, for me, it really comes down to this incredible, audacious hope that these writers embodied. They just dared to believe in a better future, you know, a future where your skin color didn't define your worth or your opportunities. And they were willing to risk everything, their freedom, their safety, their lives, to make that vision a reality.
They didn't wait for permission or for someone else to take the leap. They saw an injustice and they stood up to it, knowing the risks involved. That's powerful stuff.
Absolutely. And I think it's a good reminder that progress is rarely easy or comfortable. It's messy, it's challenging, there are setbacks, and it can be heartbreaking. But it's in those moments of challenge that we really discover who we are. The Freedom Riders teach us that we don't have to wait for someone else to make things right. We all have the power to create change.
So, what can our listeners who've been on this journey with us do to tap into that same spirit? What's one thing they can take away from this and apply to their own lives?
That's the question, right? It doesn't have to be this grand, sweeping gesture. It can be something small, something local, something that might seem insignificant in the grand scheme of things, but it all starts somewhere.
Every journey starts with a single step, right?
Exactly. Whether it's speaking up against injustice in your community, volunteering for a cause you care about, or even just having those tough conversations with family and friends, every act of courage matters.
It's like those freedom riders were saying, get on the bus. We may not know exactly where we're going, but we know we can't stay here.
Perfectly put. And isn't that the essence of it all? That unwavering belief that a better future is possible, even when the road ahead is uncertain.
It really is. Well, on that note, I think it's time for us to step off this bus, but not before we thank you all for joining us on this deep dive into the freedom rides. Until next time, keep asking those tough questions, keep learning from the past, and keep fighting for a more just and equitable world.
Thanks for listening to Mr. Hutchings History. Keep exploring, and we'll see you next time.